Okay, so this is a video I didn't know if I was going to do in the end because I think that there's a lot of stuff on this on YouTube already. A lot of people know more about this than I do, and a lot of people are more focused on it. But this is both a review of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, which I read a few months ago. It's not going to be the most comprehensive review, and probably not as comprehensive as my reviews of other books because, to be honest with you, I kind of read this book to figure out what all of the hype was about, and it's not really the type of literature I typically read, so I don't know if it will be very helpful, but I'll do my best. Um, and a little bit about the intellectual dark web in general, which is what Jordan Peterson, I think you could call him, and I don't think he would really appreciate it, but he is the kingpin of the intellectual dark web. So there's 12 rules for life that he put together, and he basically, in the foreword or the overture, whichever one it was, Peterson talks about how he started to develop the book as basically an aggregation of all of the interesting advice that he would give to people on some of these forums that he would talk to people with, whether it was on YouTube. I think before that it might have even been on Quora. I don't remember. He had been talking to people about just practical psychological advice that he gives as a clinical psychologist that is more helpful than a lot of the trendy stuff that was going on over those years. I think he said it started probably sometime in 2009 or something, and then eventually it developed into this book, which is very interesting. I always try to write. I've never successfully completed a book, so I really just write a lot of articles, and I hope one day to complete a couple books. And there's a couple that I'm working on. But here are the rules. Rule 1, stand up straight with your shoulders back. Rule 2, treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. Rule 3, make friends with people who want the best for you. Rule 4, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. Rule 5, do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. Rule 6, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. 7, pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. 8, tell the truth or at least don't lie. Rule 9, assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. Rule 10, be precise in your speech. Rule 11, do not bother children when they are skateboarding. Rule 12, pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. So, yeah, it was a couple months ago I finished this. I'm not going to go through in depth all of the rules based, because some of them, to be honest with you, they are a little more common sense, and much of the book is kind of intellectual. I mean, it's not a bad book. It's just like sometimes you get hung up on him really waxing philosophic on stuff that to the average person is kind of common sense. So I think this is what I'll say to the person who is either a curious potential reader or somebody who's already read the book and has a different impression. I think each one of the rules resonates with people differently. So some of them might be kind of important, and some of them are they go over your head. For example, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. So he goes and discusses a lot about, that's the one I think where he focuses a little more about people who are overly preachy about the world, the identity politics people, the social justice people, the type of people that have been harassing him and harass other people. So I think his point is well noted. I will say there's a major difference between the way I look at that and the way that he would, which is that there's a lot of people who have very screwed up lives that end up criticizing the world and creating a lot of change. It's not necessarily as people who grew up in country clubs or went to Yale or Oxford that are able to change the world for the better. In some cases, you need people that have gone through hell and been, been to hell and back. Quincy Jones, whose autobiography I read probably over 10 years ago now, his family situation was fucked up. If you really read that book, Q by Quincy Jones, which I read, a long time ago, and some, maybe he embellished some of it, but his family, his dad was basically so poor when they were growing up, and his mom was in an insane asylum that they were eating rats for a while. I think they were living near Cincinnati somewhere, where there was barely any indoor plumbing, so somewhere up in the mountains, if I remember correctly. Quincy Jones ended up becoming, despite addictions, despite a very topsy-turvy career, one of the greatest musical minds of the 20th century. And he might not be as famous as some of the other people, but you can look through Quincy Jones' body of work, and it's true. So I don't think you necessarily have to be completely put together in order to do amazing things. But obviously, Quincy Jones is an exception to the rule, and we are talking about the 12 rules for life. So I think he has a point. I would say that the most important rules that I saw were make friends with the people who want the best for you, which was rule 3, and rule 11, do not bother the children when they're skateboarding. So I'll explain both of those. Rule 3, make friends with people who want the best for you. I've had friends since I was a kid. The majority of the friends that I've had are people who tend to get in trouble with the law, or people who become very addicted to addictive substances, and end up, I've had, sorry to, you can't really make light of it. I think I've had 3 friends who have overdosed from addictive substances, usually opiates, and died. So, those people, it wasn't like poverty that drove them to it. It was basically, a lack of, they just didn't, they something kind of pushed them into there. I don't even think it was illness. Some people get into opiates because they were given not sedatives, but painkillers when they were ill. No, these friends of mine, I don't know what the reason was that they became addicted to those substances, but they never were able to kick them, and they're gone. God rest their souls. So eventually, obviously, everybody has somebody that they grew up with that didn't make it quite to their potential. Okay, and I still have friends of mine that I think are more talented than me, are better at all around more skilled than me, more intelligent, more socially capable, and I can't figure. I'm by no means a roaring success, but sometimes these guys, I'm like, are they really not? Are they really stuck where they are, and I'm like here? Because it's like it's ridiculous sometimes. In his book, Peterson talks a lot about a friend of his who was consistently just smoking pot all the time, and could never really form a permanent relationship with anybody, let alone a woman, to start a family with. And he meanwhile was getting married and doing fellowships and things like that. I think he was working. It might have been Princeton or I don't remember, one of the colleges up in Boston. Either it was Boston College or Harvard, whichever one. And Peterson was doing very well. And this guy would drop by every once in a while, a person that had been his friend back in Alberta, where he's originally from. And it was basically eventually Peterson had to tell him, there's nothing more that we have in common. The truth is that you never adapted to real life, and we can't continue to be friends because you're not going to change, and you're not really helping yourself, and there's nothing more I can do for you. I believe that's what he did. And if you've read the book deeper than I have, maybe I'm wrong, but that's the way I remember watching it or reading it. And I think that there's a plus and a downside to what he's saying. I don't think that necessarily you can just give up on people, but I've done it myself too. There have been friends of mine that I've said eventually, and they keep trying to make contact with me, and they don't give up. And I say, look, we were friends when we were kids, but the truth is that I'm not here to just be, I'm not a social climber, but you're not really. There's nothing we have in common anymore. It's like, yeah, we were friends when we were kids, but that's it. We don't even know anything. I mean, there's nothing to. The only thing that we have in common is that we used to do shitty things on the couch back in 8th grade. We used to like throw shit at each other and mess up the coat racks and stuff like that. That type of shit. We used to like break windows. That type of stuff. Everybody has that friend that they used to play football with in the yard or whatever. But eventually, when you grow up, people's paths in life diverge. Even my own siblings, I'm not very close with. I saw my sister this week, but I think that Peterson makes a good point. It's not always a point that people are comfortable admitting to, which is that there's people that you grow up with that they were great friends of yours, but eventually you just have to cut the cord because there's nothing more you can do for them. Another one is do not bother children when they're skateboarding. That is a very important one, and Peterson is talking a lot about how nowadays people, the educational systems are so obsessed about delivering the correct message to children, even while they can't decide what that message is. So he uses an analogy of how there were skateboarders back when he was originally, I think, teaching at the University of Toronto, and they would go down the railings in one of the public squares over there. And eventually the city decided that it was such a nuisance. It wasn't a nuisance to anybody. It was a nuisance to the city, and some people might have complained or something. So they put these kind of brackets around the railings in order to make it impossible for skateboarders to skateboard down the railings. So in reality, all they were doing was they made the space more ugly because these brackets are big, bulky, and they're just obstacles, and it's harder to use the railing because of them. And that's how they got rid of the so-called problem of skateboarding on city railings. And his issue with that is things like skateboarding and going down railings and things like that. Is it is it like a safe activity? No. But the people who do it, they're going for the thrills. They're challenging themselves. They're constantly developing a skill, and it's a hobby. Skateboarding and extreme sports. You can look back before the mid '90s. It was looked at as one of the most dangerous hobbies that there are, and it's not a safe one. But once the X Games, once it became commercialized, okay, people made video games out of it. The X Games became a major hit. Tony Hawk and Bob Burnquist and I forgot his name, Rob Dyrdek. Those guys became household names in America and in Canada, around the world, really. And skater punk became a huge thing. But now, now that the mid 2000s are over, and people have suddenly decided, well, danger in life is really not anything to look for. So they're regressing into into that sort of helicopter parent mode, or even Tim Pool calls it bulldozer parents. So he talks a lot about that issue of if you don't let people challenge themselves and try to do things that they haven't been able to accomplish, then they're never going to grow. They're going to basically become cocooned from the world, And that's how you get people that are basically dependent and children. There are certain things I'm not good at. I don't even like going to talk to the city about issues with my property. So I still ask my dad to help me with stuff like that. I'm embarrassed about it, but it's true. So I'll just put that out there. I don't like dealing with the city, but yeah, it's a real issue here. And I think if you read this book, so I'm not gonna say any more about the book itself. I think you should probably check it out at least. Thumb through it. I don't think that necessarily the entire book is a masterpiece, but it's a pretty good one. I don't have any rating system for non-Clinton books, so if it was a Clinton book, it would be um, three uh, three 2-bullet suicides. Okay, there you go. There's your rating system. I think for the actual Clinton books, I call them Slick Willies, but it doesn't really apply here. So, the intellectual dark web in the time remaining. So they're talking here about Clay Lehman and her online magazine Quillette, and I would like to write for Quillette one day, but I don't think it's going to happen because I never get any responses. It's very difficult, really, making a name as a writer today. But Politico goes through here and they start saying. So let's read through some of this. I don't think we're going to read through the whole thing, but it says, one evening this fall at a house in West Hollywood, the Australian editor and writer Claire Lehman had dinner with neuroscientist Sam Harris and Eric Weinstein, the managing director of tech entrepreneur Peter Thiel's investment firm. Joe Rogan, the podcast host, joined later on when the group decamped to a comedy club. You could think of the gathering as a board meeting of sorts for the, quote, intellectual dark web, or IDW, a loose cadre of academics, journalists, and tech entrepreneurs who view themselves as standing up to the knee-jerk left-leaning politics of academia and the media. Over the past year, the IDW has arisen as a puzzling political force made up of thinkers who support Enlightenment values and accuse the left of setting dangerously illiberal limits on the unacceptable thought. The IDW has defined itself mainly by diving into third-rail topics like the genetics of gender and racial difference, territory that seems even more fraught in the era of Me Too and the Trump resistance. But part of the attraction of the IDW is a sense that many more people agree with its principles than can come forward publicly. The dinner host on this night, Lehman says, was a famous person she would prefer not to name. Over steaks, Lehman recalls, the conversation revolved around a brewing academic scandal, a prank engineered by friends of hers. They had successfully placed 7 nonsensical research papers in various academic journals devoted to what they characterized as grievance studies. One of the papers included a lengthy passage from Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, rewritten to focus on feminism and intersectionality. Another was about rape culture and the one about rape culture in dog parks is hilarious. You have to read it if you haven't. It is one of the funniest things I've ever heard. Absurd as the papers were, they had been accepted by expert editors and published as serious research. For those in attendance, it was a ringing confirmation of just how politicized academia had become and how blindly devoted to fashionable moralities. It was also a big story for Quillette, the online magazine Lehman runs in the official digest of the IDW. Lehman had known about the prank before the Wall Street Journal broke the news, and she had some time to formulate a response that would fan the flames. And she, quotes, I want the public to be aware that there are many people within the academy who are fed up with grievance studies scholarships, acclaimed Lehman, who went on to publish responses from 5 like-minded academics, one of whom called the incident a cultural revolution in our own backyard. For readers and thinkers who regard themselves as intellectually curious but feel alienated from the lockstep politics of universities and the broader left, Quillette has become a haven for stories like this and topics treated as taboo elsewhere. At times, it has drawn intense social media backlash, with contributors labeled everything from clowns to crypto-fascists on Twitter. But fans of the site include pop psychologist Jordan Peterson. He's not a pop psychologist, by the way. He's only become a pop psychologist because of the focus given to him. It's not the same as with people such as Dr. Phil, who tried to become a pop psychologist. The media created the Jordan Peterson effect. So then the next person, of evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins, psychology professors Steven Pinker of Harvard and Jonathan Haidt of New York University, and columnists like David Brooks, Megan Daum, and Andrew Sullivan. I continue to be impressed. So never mind. They're going to keep talking a lot about this Quillette and Claire Lehman, who I think is good, and I think she does a great job, and that's real thoughtful journalism they put forward. In fact, a lot of their articles they're really long. I don't have always time to read them, but they have a great writing quality. Okay, very good. Most of their writers are just very good writers in terms of skill and in terms of clarity. So my thoughts on the intellectual dark web and why it's important, but why its importance I think is also exaggerated. The reason it is important is because the fact is that academia is skewed towards one political line, and people are no longer, a lot of these left-wing people who are in academia, they constantly talk about how there has to be academic freedom. There has to be, for example, George Ciccarello-Meyer, who was, I think, eventually forced to resign from Drexel University last year because he had been tweeting about how he wants white genocide for Christmas. So that guy, he believes in academic freedom because he believes that people like him who want to create a violent revolution throughout the world in order to bring forward the Marxist paradise that he's always dreamt of. He believes that people like that should have academic freedom, and that's why they'll always talk about academic freedom. But they never talk about the issues of freedom of speech. They never talk about due process. They never talk about individual rights because at the end of the day, they don't believe in individual rights. And I don't think that they ever will. I think those people are fanatics. And I think that the IDW is they're kind of the anti-fanatic, okay? Meaning that they're people who they really go and they're just contrarian people. They don't pledge allegiance to the conservative or the liberal sides, or certainly not the leftist sides. If you're reading any of their stuff, they kind of set themselves apart as people who they're gonna try to write things as they see it, not as they think the audience wants to read it. And you have, and some of them I think are a little diluted. Sam Harris, for example, one of the first people mentioned in the article. Sam Harris, I think, he's a huge atheist, and he's consistently trying to portray himself as this very centrist liberal, all the time talking about how Donald Trump is in fact a danger to the world or whatever. But I think he really does believe it. I think that unfortunately Sam Harris doesn't recognize. He recognizes now, but he never recognized at the time that there is nobody that's going to look out for his interests and his personal and individual freedoms as a neuroscientist to say whatever he wanted to say. So in reality, a lot of these people are liberals, like pro-abortion, I would say, okay, so let's use the language pro-choice, pro-gay marriage, not necessarily pro-gun. I'd also say a lot of them are atheists. A lot of them are themselves gay or lesbian or transsexual. They are dyed-in-the-wool liberals who do believe in individual freedoms and things like that. And so they don't have a real political home anymore because if you look at most left-wing parties around the world, even whether it's center-left or social democratic left or even further to the left, they don't treasure individual freedom anymore. They don't hold the Bill of Rights to be in the United States. I'm talking about. You won't see, go to any Democratic Party event or any event that related to one of these organizations like Indivisible, and they'll talk about civil rights and they'll talk about civil liberties, but they don't actually talk about upholding any of the ones in the Bill of Rights. When's the last time you've seen the Democratic Party protest about the Patriot Act? They haven't, not since Bush was in power, and that was going on 10 years now, almost 10 years. He left office, by the way, in 2009. If you think I'm cutting it short, so yeah, they don't protest the Patriot Act anymore. They don't care about the foreign wars that we're in. The left doesn't care about the Fourth Amendment. They don't care about the First Amendment because they're always telling you what to say or do, and who to affiliate with. They're saying no, you don't have the right to assemble. You don't have the right to talk or discuss things with people that happen to be casual acquaintances that they deem to be the wrong type of people for you. They're basically they're over-parenting. They're violating Peterson's, I think it's Rule 11. Yeah, do not bother children when they're skateboarding. They're telling you who to be friends with. They're telling you what shows to watch, and they're telling you what costumes to wear on Halloween. So these are people that they are from the left, and they're never, a lot of them are so set in their ways. I don't think that they'll ever become really, committed to the ideas of free markets or whatever. Some of them are, but some of them are not. But that's okay. And I think that the intellectual dark web is an appropriate place for you to look for information about a lot of these topics, because these are people at least willing to be honest and use scientific thinking and the scientific method in order to reach their conclusions, even though, I think that they do have liberal biases. Why do I think that they might have exaggerated influence? Look, the intellectual dark web, I think, started to form around 2015, 2014, probably due to Sam Harris and his clashes with some of these people within the progressive media, such as, for example, Glenn Greenwald and Cenk Uygur, because he said a number of things that were critical of Islam, because he's an atheist. And a lot of these atheists were starting to get attacked because people started saying, well, your atheism does not give you the right to insult an entire class of people. They were trying to make Islamophobia into a racial issue, because it happens to be that a lot of Muslims are not white. A lot of Muslims come from countries like Saudi Arabia or Indonesia or whatever. So they started attacking those people because of their issues with Islam as atheists. And it's just compounded from there because that one issue started to resonate with other people that were being attacked for being gamers. So that was the Gamergate issue. You could say Sargon of Akkad, the British YouTuber. Okay, he could be considered part of the intellectual dark web. He's not quite there because he's not an academic. He's really just a social media personality. You could say that another person that would be involved in that would probably be, Dave Rubin. Dave Rubin, of course, is a former TYT personality, who's another member of the intellectual dark web. You could say Elon Musk. Elon Musk is somebody who's offended a lot of people in liberal and progressive America, and he's no longer welcome among them. So these people do have influence, but in the past 4 or 5 years since this so-called intellectual dark web began to form, they haven't really. Yes, they've sold a lot of tickets and they've come together and they now have Quillette, which is great. And I applaud them for everything they're doing, but they're still on the outside looking in at the political process, at these universities. They don't have any power, really. The only power they have is given to them by their media exposure and by the fact that people can't help but look at them, because they're the only people responding to a lot of this nonsense going on in media and academia or whatever. You have Andy No. That's another person I wanted to mention. Andy No, who is a journalist from Portland. Okay, journalist and writer. So he is part of the intellectual dark web. What was he up until 2 years ago? Well, so this is from Business Insider. The Wall Street Journal ran a cowardly race-baiting article on Islamic England. I live there. So this person is attacking Andy No. So they're attacking him about Islamic England. So why would they care what Andy No says? He's just some gay Asian guy from Portland. I think he's Chinese American from Portland. Why would they care what he thinks? Who gives these people the power that they have? It's people like this, like Alex Lockey, who's writing in the Business Insider, trying to say, well, these people are racist because they're attacking Muslims or whatever. No, you are basically empowering them because you can't you can't take even one person saying something that's contrary to what you're saying. You're basically validating everything that they're talking about because you label everything that they say as racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, anti-Semitic, and ableist, whatever you want, heteronormative, all that stuff. So that's basically the issue. These people that Quillette, Claire Lehman, and all those people, they're doing a fantastic job in terms of writing quality stuff, but they're not really building any power because, unfortunately, the the old power structures like the BBC, like the big three networks here in the U.S., cable news, CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC, they're not falling apart yet. They have to really degenerate. Fox News does feature some IDW stuff. They let those people have kind of a fair hearing on their network at least. The rest of the networks don't. So they need to continue what they're doing, but I don't know how long it's going to take before you can really see some success. So that's about it. Please read the book, and also like my video, subscribe to the channel, also share the video. Please contribute to the Patreon and comment when it uploads, and I'll see you guys later.